because I'm going to go back up. Verse 15, and at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the youths who did eat the portion of the king's food. God's reward to what they determined they were going to do was he not only made them just as healthy as the others, he made them more healthy. This is how God handled Daniel and Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their food and wine that they should drink and give them vegetables. As for these 4 youth, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of these days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king conversed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore stood they before the king in all manners of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even to the 1st year of King Cyrus. There are a couple of controversies about the book of Daniel, and one of them is the book of Daniel is written in 2 languages. It's written in Hebrew, and it's written in Arabic, or Aramaic, and then Hebrew again. One of the questions that is asked about the book of Daniel is, why was that? I told you earlier, I asked you how many of you thought Daniel was a prophet. Daniel wasn't a prophet. He was a statesman that God used to prophesy. Just because a person is capable of prophesying or teaching God's word doesn't necessarily mean they fit into the standard that we tend to put that other person in. God may have supplied them with the ability to do that, but not given them that job in their life. I'm a safety guy in reality. That's what my career really is. Okay? But do I teach? Yeah. I teach in a lot of different ways. I teach to my employees how to be safe. I teach them how to do their job. I teach them how to use their manuals so they can do their job without me. And in reality, if I do my job well with you, you're going to learn how to take God's word and dissect it in prayer with God without me being there. Because that's really what my job is. My job is to help fit you so you can do your job without me. Because in reality, you're supposed to do this job yourself in your own heart, in your own life, with Christ as your guide. I can't be your guide. Christ has to be your guide. If I fill that slot, I'm getting in God's way. In chapter 2, there's 3 times that the dream is talked about. I'm actually not going to read the dream 3 times. I'm going to go to the 3rd time that the dream is discussed, and that is when Daniel brings it about. But I'm going to tell you that the dream has 3 occasions. One is when Nebuchadnezzar dreams it and then turns around and only remembers that he's all stressed out over this dream, but doesn't remember the dream. This creates a situation for all those who would tell him what the dream means. And the situation is, first of all, they have to tell him what the dream is. They have to tell him what he dreamed. Is this creating an impossible situation for an average man? Pretty much so. I can kind of relate to what Nebuchadnezzar is talking about. The other day I'm driving down the road. Actually, it was last Monday. It's dark out. I'm heading over to do a job. And I get off the freeway up in Grass Valley, and all of a sudden something's wrong. I don't know what's wrong. But before I even have a chance to really total this up in my mind, my foot slips off the throttle and slips over and covers the brake. Anybody here know what the term cover the brake means? Covering the brake means getting ready to stop in case you need to. So your foot's over the brake without necessarily applying pressure on the brake. This is a term truck drivers use. I then start to press on the brake because I realize I'm uncomfortable, but I still don't know what it is. All of a sudden, crossing in front of my headlights is a very dark car without its headlights on. I then realized what I saw. I saw something pass in front of the lights in the grocery store, the shopping center, on the other side of the car. It was far enough away from the lights not to see the actual silhouette of the car, but just to know there was something wrong. It wasn't even obvious enough for me to know what was wrong. But subconsciously, that back of my mind back here said, cover the brake. And because I've learned over the years that when there's something like that going on, I need to respond. And the best way to respond is to slow down. Then I realized what was wrong. Nebuchadnezzar knows there's something wrong, but he doesn't know why. He goes to all of his soothsayers and all the people that are his counselors and says, tell me what this dream was and tell me what it meant. And none of them know. He's going to kill all these people. Because what good is a counselor if he doesn't know what he's doing? We use the term today, fired. Nebuchadnezzar really meant it. Okay? He was going to fire them literally. Okay? He's going to fire them. And Daniel says, wait a minute. Let me do some praying. Let me think about this, and I'll tell the king tomorrow what it's about. So we're going to pick up just briefly in verse 3, chapter 2, verse 3. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then he spoke to the Chaldeans, to the king of the Aramaic, in Aramaic, O king, I have lived forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. There's the problem. They have to first of all know what the dream is. Daniel requests some time to pray, and that's where in verse 18, we'll pick it up in verse 18, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Point 2 in verse 19. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Point 3. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He moves on as he goes through this. He goes on, he says, and he changed the times and the seasons. He removed kings and setting up kings, and he giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to those who understand with understanding. In verse 25, he's talking to the man who's come to him, and he's gone to the king, and there Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation of it? Here's Daniel's answer. Most of us, if we had an answer, would say, yeah, I know the answer. Not Daniel. Daniel answering in the presence of the king, and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men and astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers reveal unto the king. But there is a God in heaven, who revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and vision of the head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came unto thy mind upon thy bed, what shall come to pass hereafter, and he who revealeth secrets maketh known unto thee what shall come to pass. In the dream, you have the head of gold, you have a torso of silver, you have bronze, and you have iron and clay. And he goes on in the course of these things, because there's a lot of reading, I'm going to leave it to you to read, to describe that first of all, the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar and king in Babylon. He then talks about Persia. He doesn't mention it by name, but he says there's going to be a kingdom that follows him. He talks about the Greeks and Alexander the Great. He talks about Rome, and at the time he doesn't know who these people are either, but he knows it's coming. And then he talks about the latter part of man, the latter kingdoms of man that are built of clay and iron. And that as things go on in this statue, in this image that he dreams, things get worse for man. Anybody here that has any doubt that things are getting worse for man? Okay? If you have a doubt that things are getting worse, we need to talk. Because things are getting worse. Okay? It's decaying, it's falling apart, it's crumbling. I want to go over to the next step, and that is picking it up in chapter 2, starting with verse 44, because there's something God is doing in spite of man. Okay? In the latter part he picks up, and in the days of the kings shall God, the God of heaven, set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and shall stand forever. For as much as thou hast sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it broke in pieces the iron and the bronze and the clay and the silver and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. I can't think of any better way to end the definition of what Nebuchadnezzar or any of us find, is that the answer to our problem is God. If you don't have God in your life, there is no better answer. Because what has been happening through all the kingdoms of earth is that God is doing something else. And he started by sending up a little young man. Now there's some concept that Daniel may have only been 14, 15 years old. He was referred to in the text as a child when he went to Babylon. But he wasn't a very old person. Okay? You got to remember that back in those days, a person 12 years old was old enough to be a king. Think about King Tut. Everybody know who King Tut is? Tutankhamun. He was about 12, 16 years old, right around there. He was the king of Egypt. You didn't have to be terribly old to be a king. All right? So when we talk about this person being a child, God had prepared him for what he was going to do in Babylon. And what was the first thing he did? I don't want to defile myself. Therefore, I'm only going to eat vegetables. Why was that an issue? Because of the way in which they prepared food. One of the things they weren't allowed to do was eat food that had been sacrificed to another god. So not knowing how that food was prepared, wanting to remain in good stead with God, would mean making sure I don't eat the wrong thing. So I'm going to eat vegetables. They tend to be raw. There's not going to be a preparation problem with this. After all of this goes on, in chapter 3 we pick up the issue of the image, the golden image. It was 60 cubits in breadth, and it was 6 cubits in height. Another version I have, the one I have over here, says it was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That's a pretty big golden image. Every time Brandon and Micah and John and Ben and Alexi get up here and start playing these instruments, the people of Babylon were supposed to bow down to this statue and worship it. To not bow down to that statue meant cast you into a fiery furnace and you're going to burn up. In chapter 3, we have what every Christian will have in his life, and that is the accusers. Starting in verse 8, wherefore at the time the Chaldeans came and accused the Jews. The 3 young men they're accusing are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in verse 14, Nebuchadnezzar calls them in and says, what's this I hear? You're refusing to worship my God? They answer up in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. When I talked about courage this morning, this is the courage they're talking about. They're willing to die to follow through with what God has said to do. We aren't guaranteed we're going to have a really easy life. In fact, we're going to have the same economic problems. We're in the same world that all of those people who do not know Christ are in. We're going to have the same economic difficulties. We're going to have the same diseases. But we can rest assured that in the final analysis, God is in control and he's using us to do it. In some cases, he's going to use us in our difficulties and in our end of life to save someone else's life. Like the song about the guy who was a pastor who died in a bus accident, and as a result, a prostitute comes to know Christ, and her son becomes a pastor. And in the song, he's teaching in a church using the Bible that pastor gave to his mom, and it's still covered in his blood. We are not guaranteed that, like Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, we're going to walk away from a fiery furnace unscathed. But I want you to show, because this is important with regard to Nebuchadnezzar. I didn't underline that. Why didn't I underline that? And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the fiery furnace. I'm going to go up a little further. This is starting with verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than was usually heated. And he commanded the most mighty men that they were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound, their coats and their stockings and their turbans and their garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king command was urgent, the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame and the fire slew those men that took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded, and rose up in haste, and spoke and said unto his counselor, Did not we cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? And they answered and said unto the king, True, O king. And he answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God's. Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth, come here. Can you imagine? Here's the thing. God didn't just say, I'm going to have you do this. He said, I'm going to be there with you. That every time you go through a difficulty in life, understand the Holy Spirit's in you if you know Christ. And he's there too. He's going through it with you and for you. And whatever the end result seems to be in the mind of man, the end result in God's mind is the completion of his purpose for your life. And it doesn't stop there. It doesn't come to an end because your life ended here. That's just the opening of a door to go into the rest of the life God has in mind for you, or as an old news broadcaster used to say, the rest of the story.